My name is Ryan Stillwell. I'm the owner here at Stillwell Risk Partners. We are a commercial insurance and risk management firm. And one of the areas that we specialize in is workers' compensation. So today I'm going to answer the question, what is workers' compensation? So whether you've had workers' comp for 20 years, nobody's ever explained the concept of it to you and the basics, or you're hiring your first employee and need to get it for the first time, this is going to cover some basics about what workers' compensation is, what coverage it provides, how the policies are rated and your premiums are determined, and some important information about what to expect going forward. So workers' compensation is a type of insurance policy that every state in the United States, other than Texas, requires that employers have. So it's a requirement by law, but it's really something that you should have as well, just to protect yourself as a business owner from when or if an employee gets injured while on the job. So what coverage does workers' compensation include? Number one, it covers the cost of medical expenses, right? So if somebody falls off a ladder and breaks their leg, or they have a laceration on a finger and need to go get stitches, it covers the medical expenses from those injuries. The other part of what it covers from the injury standpoint is lost time from work. So if, let's say, somebody falls off a ladder and breaks their leg and they can't come back to work for 6 weeks, they're going to be entitled to some benefits under the workers' comp policy that's going to pay them a portion of their wages that they would have earned had they been working, right? So we call this, in the technical term for it, is the indemnity portion of the claim. Usually it's somewhere around 60% of what they would have made in terms of gross wages. And that varies by state. Different states have different rules about this. Insurance is highly segmented across the states. So the coverage typically works in the same way, but the specifics of how the employee gets paid can vary by state. So that's the workers' compensation portion of the policy. The other portion of the policy is called employer's liability. So what is employer's liability? If an employee is injured while on the job and wants to sue the employer or the business owner for negligence in contributing to their injury or illness, you have a liability coverage on the workers' comp policy called employer's liability. The standard limits for this are relatively low, $100,000 per accident or per injury, per illness, but those can be upgraded for relatively low costs. And it usually makes sense to upgrade them to $500,000 or even $1 million just to have that better coverage. So those are the two coverage areas on the workers' compensation. Your workers' compensation, the statutory limits is set by the state, and your employer's liability. Now, how is a workers' compensation policy rated? So workers' compensation is primarily rated based on payroll and the classification of that your employees fall into. So it's possible that you could have a business that has all employees qualified into one classification. A common example of this is if you're running an auto services garage. Even the people working the front desk, as long, they get qualified in the same class code of auto services as the mechanics working on the cars, right? But you could also have, let's say, a contracting business, right? And you have people that work in concrete, people that work in framing, people that work in masonry, people that work in painting, right? Those are all separate classifications that can appear under your policy. And then there's also dedicated classifications for salesperson and office staff. There's that can be included on that as well. So it's very possible that you could have many different classifications on your policy, depending on the size and scope of your business. But it would also just be one classification. And why is it important that the classifications matter, right? So each classification comes with a different rate based on the expected losses in that classification, right? So if you're a painter and you're working 3 or 4 stories up, it's a different type of exposure than if you're, working in a retail store, right? So they're going to have different rates, and the rates are multiplied as a factor of payroll. So this is where the rating really comes in, right? So you take your estimated payroll for the next 12 months, and you're going to multiply it by that rate as a percentage, and that's going to give you kind of baseline pricing. There are some taxes and fees that get built into the policy as well, but those are standardized by state typically, and you're going to see those apply from one insurance carrier to the next. So classifying your employees correctly in terms of the workers' comp policy is very important. And one of the things you may have noted was that I said the payroll is estimated at the beginning of the 12-month policy term. What will happen at the end of the 12-month policy term, and this is really important if you have never had workers' comp before, to expect an audit of the workers' comp. And what the insurance company does during the audit is they want to go back and determine what your actual payroll was over that 12-month period, and then they adjust your costs retroactively. So an example of this is if you had, let's say you're starting a new business and you expect to have 100,000 in payroll in the first year, and you pay $1,000 for your workers' comp based on that $100,000 in payroll. At the end of that 12 months, the insurance company comes in, does an audit. They look at your payroll records. They say, oh, you did really well. You had $200,000 in payroll instead of $100,000. Maybe business grew quicker than you anticipated, right? So what they're going to do is retroactive for that 12-month period, instead of $1,000 for $100,000 in payroll, they're now going to bump your premium up to $2,000 for $200,000 in payroll. This is just nice round numbers as an example. It's often not as clean as that, right? So then at the end of that policy term, you're going to get the audit bill and owe that extra $1,000 back to the insurance company. There are certain strategies we can put in place to help mitigate the risk of, payroll fluctuations. If you have seasonal payroll or you're growing very quickly, but you don't know how quickly your payroll is going to rise, we can utilize what's called pay-as-you-go billing, which links it with your payroll company. And we can do that with any payroll company, so you don't have to change. Makes it very easy to track and manage your cash flow on a little bit more of a proactive basis. It also makes sure that you're not overpaying the insurance company, right? If you estimated you had $1 million in payroll, but there's a global pandemic and all of a sudden you only have half of that, you're not paying them in advance for that higher payroll exposure, right? So there's a lot of strategies that we can employ in terms of managing your billing for the workers' comp, managing your risk for the workers' comp to help keep your employees safe, and manage your experience modification rate, which I'm not going to go into detail now. But that's the gist of workers' comp, what the coverage is, how it's rated, and be aware of the audit at the end of the term if you're new to workers' compensation. Again, my name is Ryan Stillwell. I'm the owner here at Stillwell Risk Partners. One of the things that we specialize in is workers' compensation. We have aligned ourselves with most of the top workers' compensation markets in the area. So if you're paying a lot for your workers' comp or you're just getting started and you want to see what options are out there, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to take a look at your current policy, give you an honest opinion on whether or not you're paying more than you have to, or if there might be some premium savings on the table. Working with as many carriers as we do, we usually have really great options and can find premium savings for our clients. Ryan Stillwell, Stillwell Risk Partners. We help our clients take control of their risk.